They warned me about the voice of God, so I was prepared. Um, I'm glad. Thank you. Thank you all for your good work. So in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you what you might think of as spiritual practice, or what you might consider as spiritual practice, or what you might be hoping for in your life around spiritual practice. And so I just want to tell you now so you can have some time to think about it in the future. But yeah, maybe something springs to mind right away. But I'll just let you know, I do a silent meditation retreat at the turn of the year, over 10 days in January when I can, when it's possible. And this year I was there doing that with reduced numbers of people, and we were all in masks. I spent a lot more time outside than I normally would because it just got trying to do deep relaxed breathing with a mask on got a little bit intense. But for this reason, because of this retreat, I often start the year thinking about spiritual practice. And that retreat is also a liminal space, right? It's separate from the world. Liminal spaces are a kind of threshold, like a place between our preset destinations. The changing of the year is a liminal time. This time of pandemic and climate catastrophe, also a liminal time where we don't see the outcome right away. In our families or in our nations, that place maybe where we move from not speaking about something to starting to talk about it, that's a liminal space. Things are shifting. The movement for Black lives, the Me Too movement, voting times, changing of districting lines, and of course, wartime is one that's forward in our minds right now. Liminal spaces can be just uncomfortable, or they can be dangerous and horrifying. And I just want to name, because I'm feeling this in my body, and I'm sure you are too if you were listening to the news at all this morning, just that we want to hold in our hearts those who are living in fear of war and violence right now. And as UUs, we also commit to our advocacy and solidarity with them. And when I say them, I mean with ourselves, right? Because there is no them in our beliefs. Especially as UUs, one of our values is that we never stop growing. But also liminal spaces where we don't quite see the other side of what's coming. Liminal spaces are pretty essential for growth. It's a time of unknowing, a time of being in the dark. The Irish speak of places that are thin places, portals to the mystical, fairies, unknown, home to magic, a place of difficulty, but also liberation. Wild places. Gloria Anzaldúa spoke in her book Borderlands, La Frontera, about living at the border as a persistent liminal space, experiencing her body and her life as a kind of stranger, belonging on neither side of the line. Liminal spaces can create a time of letting go or taking up something closer to the life we want to live and the world we want to see. After a long struggle, and the struggle continues for her, Anzaldúa finally claimed the line, the border, as where she was going to live, as home. And that can be a hard place for tenderness, that liminal space, but also where it's most needed. So sometimes when we think about spiritual practices, we're tempted toward like achievement as our mindset, right? I think that's funny to think about. There's a programmer called Janelle Shane who works with, as she calls them, algorithms, which we call artificial intelligence. And she asks these algorithms to suggest positive changes for the future based on, so she does like computer modeling using internet text and food blogs and social media and spam as her data. She has a new job, which is the futurist in residence at the Smithsonian, which is a pretty cool job title, futurist in residence. So some of these computer-generated suggestions were very practical and poetic, like every time a bird flies past me, I will remember to breathe. It's pretty good for a computer. And some of them were more whimsical, like on the day of the first snow, I will paint a canvas red. And then there were some that came out pretty funny, like act like a cabbage for a month. Or jump in front of a So if you are tickled by these, I invite you to her blog called AI Weirdness, which I really enjoy, and they continue to be weird, and she does all kinds of experiments with them. But I like that she's trying to involve computers in this question of how we care for ourselves. And in times of these big changes, when we know that change or courage is needed, sometimes it's easy too to get stuck, right? We can have depression, like not knowing, not feeling the movement into a new place. We can feel self-righteousness. I shouldn't have to change or do anything different, or fixed views, or we can force ourselves into something new, right? We can just start talking about it and never do anything, or we can judge ourselves really harshly. So if we think of these habits as practices, these are all practices, right? Judging ourselves harshly, as you know, can definitely be a practice, something we put into our bloodstream again and again, and then have to like unlearn and let go of. But the practice that will actually allow us space to move or grow is a spiritual practice, right? And when I think of that, I think of spirit, like the part of us that is curious within us, the part of us that's offering goodwill, the part of us that knows the truth when we hear it, the part of us who loves beauty even if it's painful. And as a chaplain, I feel like that's part of why times of difficulty, including like illness and dying, are spiritual times, because we're feeling both great love and great grief together. And we're unwilling to let go of either one of those. And so I think of spiritual practice. That's like a simple, regular practice which can connect us to what's around us and what's inside us. Maybe that's energy or body or people or senses or God. And so I just want to invite people to share any practices that are important to you or anything that you're sort of working on developing right now, if you would like to. Yeah.
I read a wonderful book called Book of Joy.
Book of Joy.
When Desmond Tutu went to visit the Dalai Lama, the last trip with his daughters. When one of the things, I've been looking into happiness as a practice.
Yeah, happiness as a
Because I
practice.
come from people who are heavily into philosophy, and it's not happy.
It's not happy.
And I was the family clown, so I
Okay.
liked the philosophy, but I wanted to play.
Yeah. Oh,
So
there's
this
huge
book-
spiritual depth in play, right?
I didn't know. I really had no idea that laughing could be a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Until I got into Tai Chi, and a little Chinese man would say, and then everybody in the class would do the same thing.
Oh my God.
And it just changed the energy all over. Then I found out Bhutan is a place whose GNP is measured by happiness.
Yeah. The gross
And
national
I've been
happiness.
questing to go there and building my lungs for it.
Yeah.
So that's me.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, that is it's a practice of joy, laughter, happiness, and taking that seriously. And thank you so much for the microphone, Diane. I appreciate that. Yeah. Anybody else?
I have 2 dogs, and they sleep right next to me on the floor. And it is their great joy every day when I open my eyes. And they both leap up out of their bed, and they put their paws up on my bed, and we engage in just a roughhousing, scritchy, scratchy, lovey-dovey joy fest first thing in the morning, every day.
Every day.
Each and every day.
That's lovely.
And that is such a joyous way. I recommend it. Such a joyous way to start your day. And I know somebody who probably starts her day that way as well. So
Joyful frolic time with the dogs. Oh my gosh, yes.
I call it unlimited love in unlimited quantities.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
So Chili on Zoom says, recently I had to do some exceptions in my backyard. Some of the plants were being dug up and destroyed. I felt bad and saved some by putting them in a pail and adding a little water. I felt bad that I could not save more of them.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Chili. Yeah, looking after our plants, like taking care of a thing. I I was speaking to a class of college kids a couple weeks back, and one of the things that, because if you think, I mean, a lot of folks who are just developing who they are, like right now is a really weird time to try and figure out what your self-care is and who you are and how you take care of yourself. And so one of the things we talked about was like creating a compassionate space in the care of plants or by listening, doing a listening practice with someone, because it's just like when you create that compassionate space, that caring space, even if you can't save every single plant, it's like you get to live in that compassionate space too. Right? It's not just for one person. You don't just create it for the one person. It becomes a pool that we can all swim in, which is really nice. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like I'm thanking the universe, Chili. Thank you. Yeah, so there are so many, and they all sound a little bit different, right? I mean, yeah, the rush of joy or the sort of attention of care and paying attention to the people that and the living things that are in our vicinity. And this, like, our spiritual care could be a productive thing, like saving plants, or cutting an apple, or baking a loaf of bread, making a bed, or sweeping the floor, or painting. But our focus gets really focused on noticing, on enjoying, right? And on, care for this being. I offered a workshop on everyday ritual a little while ago, and one of the moms who was there was a nurse also. And she mentioned that the time before bed was like this time, then she would just basically be trying to wrangle kids and make sure that all their lists were checked off for the morning and that everything was okay and that everybody had their teeth brushed and sort of like this big long list. And she said, I really want to treat that more as an intentional time, because it is time that we spend with each other every single day. So why don't I treat that as sacred? Why don't I treat that as like a ritual that we have together that we can do, that I'm going to remember for my whole life, and hopefully they will. But it's like to focus on the thing about it that you want to value, and be intentional about having your attention not on the list, but on the presence with our people, right? And I think too, we can see spiritual practice in things that are purposely non-productive, right? Like a mandala that is made of sand that just blows away with the wind, or sitting, or swimming, or singing. Like, I know singing helps my heart to feel happy, but it's not productive. It just makes my whole self like light up. Or yoga, just those practices that allow us to just be with our body and mind. Tai Chi. And we lost Thich Nhat Hanh. And I'll just tell you a little bit about him. He was ordained at age 16. He was a real peaceful leader in Vietnam, to the point that he was exiled from Vietnam and spent a lot of his adult years outside Vietnam, in the U.S. and in France, in Plum Village. But Ram Dass talks about hospice work as walking people home, right? That we're all just walking each other home. And I love that, and I think that Thich Nhat Hanh is just a living example of that, right, in life. It's that after people had experienced the horrors of civil war in Vietnam, he walked people across the country to their homes. Like, he walked them back, and that walking practice, that practice of getting back to where you are, where you're safe, and just being surrounded by people and trying to rebuild that feeling of safety. Yeah. Thich Nhat Hanh knew what he was talking about when he had this very positive view of what spiritual practice could do for us, right? It didn't come from an overly rosy point of view. He actually had seen so many terrible things. And still, he thought of meditation. So I love this. He thought of sort of the larger Buddhist project, if Buddhism can have a project, but as peace through compassionate listening. That are just offering ourselves peace through compassionate listening. We're offering the world peace through compassionate listening, right? So the spiritual practice, when we get strong at that, it can hold us on days when things are simple and it's all within our grasp, and on days when things are much harder, right? And if we think about how folks can be drawn into fundamentalism, for example, that can be because spiritual grounding is not there when something hard happens, right? We don't know what's holding us, and we can be drawn to anything that looks like solid ground. And sometimes people will say, often with the aim of conversion, that humans have a God-shaped hole in us. And I hope that's not triggering language for anyone. I know I've heard it many times, and for some people, maybe that is a God-shaped hole, right? But the longer that I have lived with that feeling, the more I think that it might just be like the loneliness of a being with senses and a nervous system in a complicated world where we need to act nonetheless, where pleasure and pain are not absolute indicators of what we have to do. Sometimes we have to struggle for another person's freedom or for our own. Sometimes our own nourishment or our own food even comes at the expense of someone else's pain or poor living conditions. And that can bring us loneliness and fear and frustration and anger. And we may look for meaning, but the dream of living in harmony may seem really far away, right in here. I think that's what that hole is. And that dream may be really far away. And we can live, right, by covering up those feelings, by drowning them or smothering that part of us that yearns to draw a free breath. I'll just self-disclose that I am moving out of my house. Yesterday I was self-medicating with marshmallows. It was not a pretty scene. I mean, the giant ones, like the ones that are like, I don't even know what they're as big as. They're really big. And we can do that, right? We can be like, okay, be quiet. Okay, I know you're feeling anxious. But there is that part of us, right, that's struggling with anxiety and fear and pressure and addiction. Or we can take a breath, put down the marshmallow, give those feelings some air, just allow them to be. If there is to be peace between neighbors, Lao Tzu wrote, there must be peace in the home. If there's to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart. But that doesn't mean that we're just docile, right? It doesn't mean, so Gloria Anzaldúa talks about claiming her space, her peace in her heart. She says, I would rather speak Spanglish, and as long as I have to accommodate the English speaker, rather than having them accommodate me, my tongue will be illegitimate. I will no longer be made, though, to feel ashamed of existing, of speaking how I speak. I will have my voice, Indian, Spanish, white. I will have my serpent's tongue, my woman's voice, my sexual voice, my poet's voice. I will overcome the tradition of silence. So powerful, right? That claiming, that practice of speaking. And for you, spiritual practice may mean a practice of speaking up. Or if that's easy for you and you do that like breathing, maybe that spiritual practice is silence, is letting the world speak back to you, letting yourself speak back to you in those deeper places. And I'll share one thing that I've practiced on retreat that you might love, is practicing walking upon the earth and envisioning the earth supporting me kindly. And I hope that I'll just move this way so I don't totally ruin all the camera situation, but it's like you take one step and you envision the earth stepping up to meet you. And if you want to close your eyes and envision this is good. I know it's complicated to do because there's COVID, but like in your mind, that can still be a very powerful practice. You practice the earth moving up to meet you. Like that Irish poem, may the earth rise to meet you, right? But it's like, may I envision the earth as a partner in my walking, right? May I envision the earth as a supportive person helping me to go where I'm going. Just taking that moment to envision. some of the connectedness that's part of our walking, what Thich Nhat Hanh would call interbeing. And I think when we do that, like when we can do a practice like that, it's like we're taking notice of an important relationship. Just noticing that here we are, and here she is, the earth, holding us up. We can practice gratitude in that moment. We can do that anywhere. We can do that in the HEB. We could do that any place we want. We can do that while we're driving, I suppose. Not with our eyes closed, but Thich Nhat Hanh said that joy is born of this kind of awareness, because we're no longer feeling that we're alone, that we're that one solitary marble rolling around, but that we are, I don't know, if I carry that too far, we're like part of a pinball game, so I won't say that, but like that we're connected, right? Maybe we're part of a game of marbles. And that's one thing that I love from Buddhism, is that kind of like you're talking about when you wake up and you're like, okay, this is my joy practice for this morning with these dogs. It's like that practice part is part of what I learned about spiritual practice from Buddhism, is that this is a practice. We do it again and again. We see how that feels today. We try to experience this in a fresh way, right? But also, I think that we can then be grateful for what happens without having to say, no, this is how it has to be. This is how I have to feel. This is what I need out of this, right? It's like, no. We'll just see how it shows up today. We'll see how this is. I feel like from Christian spiritual practice, we can also learn not to be afraid of joy. There's like singing and praise in Christian spiritual practice. There are these moments of over-the-top togetherness and joy, unity, even a kind of ecstasy. And in that, I want to ask you, like, what would it be like daily, weekly, to say, there's ecstasy and I'm giving into it? I'm giving into that. Does that have to do with a meal that you love and you want to just eat slowly and with pleasure? Not an escape, but not just saying no to something that we don't want to experience. Oh gosh, those feelings are really hard, but actually yes, I want to say yes to this. What does that feel like? How can we practice that? Exploring what brings you bliss. I think within Christian spiritual practice, too, we think about what accompanies us. I have a dear friend who spends 90% of his time either working from anxiety or reading and watching things to escape the anxiety. And I hear that. Like, sometimes that's just where we are and that's all we can do, right? That's just all we can do. But it's also like worth noting that like that's the anxiety that's accompanying every minute of the day. And like everything else is sort of revolving around that one little node. So whether it is God or breath or anxiety or work or family, what is the through line that walks with us every day? And what do we want it to be? How do we reach and figure out what we want it to be? Another of our UU sources is humanism, right? Which is present in the healthy and human forms of so many faiths. I have a friend who's a kid whose parent is ill. And I think Christianity reaches out and says, "Lo, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me," right? Just like that sense of, okay, I'm accompanied on this walk. But thinking about how I can accompany her as an adult in her life, thinking with her parents, what is good for her to know? What's too much? Where will we see her sense of stability threatened? How can we build up extra support? How can we prepare a child while we prepare ourselves for the idea that what we love is mortal? And maybe some of you would choose like a prayer practice in that situation, or like a planned connectedness, like setting up time with this person, or bringing this person breakfast every day so we have like a sacred time with them. But that's I think those are humanist questions there, ethics, where we're asking like, this is a bad thing, how can I help? What is my role? What is right to do here? And maybe that's an intentional spiritual practice for you, noticing in a situation what is mine to do here? Something to honor, right? That doing can change things. But also we have to remember the doing is not the same as being with someone, just showing up for them or with them, showing up, just showing up. So one thing I love about Buddhism and Hinduism is that there's this idea that we follow our nature, right? They're making a claim about what our nature is, that our nature is worthy and good. Everybody here, your nature is worthy and good. Everybody not here, your nature is worthy and good. And I really like this view because I think that means that our life project, our practices, are just about brushing away impediments, right? Getting the feathers, moving the feathers off of our jacket, or uncovering our natural loving state, our natural care, letting the things which distract us or pull us away from presence, from connection, letting those things rest. And sometimes that's really hard. If you've got a lot of things that are pulling you, asking you to shift gears all the time, overlapping, interrupting, just remember in those moments that your core nature is thriving, is interbeing, is remembering connections, is letting go of the things that dull your natural shine. I guess maybe just one more thing. If you are thinking about, I'm checking my time, okay. Yeah, I'll just say, like a little while when I was going to divinity school, and I was going further than my parents ever had. Oh my gosh, did I lose my mic? No, we're good? Okay. And I realized that all kinds of thoughts could come up in a new place, like graduate school. We always want to tell a story for ourselves around events that has to do with survival, to keep ourselves sharp or to make us aware of dangers that might be. Or within mindfulness, we just realize that we can recreate a persistent story that we had from way before, just to tether us, just to give us a kind of comfort and something to lean on. And so we can get caught in striving or in shame or the feeling that we're not good enough. And a powerful kind of self-care in those situations can just be letting those stories just rest, allowing ourselves some gentle space without spinning stories. Okay, I really belong here. Okay, I don't belong here. Okay, I'm good enough, but no, I need to do so many things to be good enough and get better. Whatever your stories happen to sound like, that's okay, but we can let those be. Sometimes that just resting, letting those rest can be powerful. So if you're thinking about or starting to practice a new spiritual practice, I know that you know we don't do this in a vacuum. We do this in loving community, and we can do that with other seekers. You may be part of a group right now, or you may want to start one. And I love that word, interbeing, which Thich Nhat Hanh uses to describe our interconnected selves. He talks about it as seeing the cloud. I'll use this face mask. Seeing the cloud in the face mask, right? Or the piece of paper. Seeing that the cloud rained upon the earth grew us a tree, the tree turned into paper, which we hold in our hands, and therefore there is a cloud in our face mask or in our piece of paper, right? And the closer we can get to seeing that, and I think in witchcraft we can see this as balance, right? The balance of darkness and light, the ways that things interact with each other, the way that nothing is alone. Thich Nhat Hanh and Gloria Anzaldúa both found wholeness through caring for themselves and for others in the liminal spaces, reclaiming voice, walking with purpose. In the world at this time, we're in a narrow place, right? Facing difficult choices. And we can meet that by narrowing ourselves, by pushing, by forcing, or by broadening our view. And as Gloria Anzaldúa puts it, doing work that matters, que vale la pena, within ourselves and in the world. We can move forward with subtle forcing or stubborn gentleness. I don't think that we save the world by forcing, but by simplifying, by becoming simpler and clearer about what it is we need. We who have lost our sense and our senses, our touch, our smell, our vision of who we are, We who frantically force and press all things without rest for body or spirit, hurting the earth, hurting ourselves, we call a halt. So I ask you this morning, what does your Sabbath look like? And I invite us to carry that question into our homes and into our lives with gentleness and also stubbornness. May it be so. Thank you, friends.